Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report, I'm Amy Goodman. The youngest person to ever head the NAACP is entering the race for governor in Maryland. Ben Jealous is known for leading the NAACP's successful campaign to abolish Maryland's death penalty. While he was president of the NAACP in the 2016 presidential race, he was a prominent Bernie Sanders surrogate. Now he's a candidate himself, vowing to pursue a broad agenda of civil rights, social justice, and economic reform. Jealous announced his candidacy Wednesday outside his cousin's West Baltimore flower shop, which he opened after the 2015 uprising and unrest that followed the death of Freddie Gray in Baltimore police custody. In the first speech of his campaign, Ben Jealous called for holding police accountable.
We will cut the murder rate. We will lock up the shooters. Right. And we will restore trust by both better training officers, but yes, by also holding officers who kill unarmed civilians fully accountable.
Ben Jealous joins a growing field of potential challengers to incumbent Republican Governor Larry Hogan. Last month, technology entrepreneur Alec Ross announced he also plans to seek the Democratic nomination in the race. Ross served as senior advisor for innovation to Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State. At least 6 others are also exploring runs. All of this comes more than a year before Maryland's gubernatorial election. Well, just after Ben Jealous announced his plans to throw his hat in the race, I spoke with him about why he's chosen this route. He is a well-known national organizer and activist, why he's chosen to run for governor.
I'm raising my kids here in Maryland, and I've been a community organizer my entire life. And there comes a time, and for me it came after the uprisings, it came, frankly, after Trump won, when you just decided there's nothing more important than organizing right where you live to make that place better for your children and their classmates and the children across the state. And so we're running this race together, building this movement. Activists across this state, small business owners across the state who have decided that it's time to start building our state from the bottom up again, making sure that every kid has a great teacher in their classroom, making sure that work pays for everybody. So if you're working a full-time job, you get full-time pay. And that means that the minimum wage has to be raised to $15 per hour. So family can afford the basic necessities, even when mom's just working one job, and so she can be home with the kids, or dad can be home with the kids. And we're also running, quite frankly, to increase public safety. As you know, I've invested a lot of my career in improving public safety and making sure our justice system works for all of us. And we in Baltimore right now are having a crisis. We've got to get the shooters off the street, stop the killings. We also got to rebuild trust, and that starts with stopping the killing of unarmed civilians by the police and holding the police fully accountable. And so I'm running this campaign for my kids and for kids across the state with people who, like me, have gotten involved because they know that their family situation is that their family situation and struggle is shared by families across the state, and it's time for us to come together to resist, yes, but to move beyond resistance and move our state forward.
So you announced in front of your cousin's flower shop, which she opened after the uprising, after the killing of Freddie Gray. In April 2015, Baltimore erupted in protest after his death in police custody. The 27-year-old African-American man who died from spinal injuries a week after Baltimore police arrested him. His family and attorneys say his voice box was crushed, his spine 80% severed at the neck. A preliminary autopsy report showed Gray died of a spinal injury. Last July, Baltimore City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby implicated the Baltimore Police Department in the failure to bring a guilty verdict against any of the officers that she indicted in the death of Freddie Gray. This is what she said then.
As the world has witnessed over the past 14 months, the prosecution of on-duty police officers in this country is unsurprisingly rare and blatantly fraught with systemic and inherent complications.
Yes, it is.
Unlike with other cases where prosecutors work closely with the police to investigate what actually occurred, what we realized very early on in this case was that police investigating police, whether they're friends or merely their colleagues, was problematic.
That's right. That's right.
There was a reluctance and an obvious bias that was consistently exemplified not by the entire Baltimore Police Department, but by individuals within the Baltimore Police Department at every stage of the investigation, which became blatantly apparent in the subsequent trials.
So that was Marilyn Mosby, the youngest state's attorney in Maryland, who failed to get any conviction of the police officers she indicted. Do you share her assessment of the police department's resistance to investigate their own?
Now, my grandfather was on law enforcement in Baltimore for almost 30 years. And, he would tell you that you've got to bring in investigators from the outside, that there is a code of silence. And the reality is that still no one to this day, not even senior officials on the force in Baltimore, can explain how it is that one of their lieutenants, looking at a, ultimately mortally wounded Freddie Gray, when an officer said to him, "We've got to take him to the hospital," said no. And that's why you're seeing those officers terminated. I mean, the reality is that there's a lot of people, even inside the Baltimore Police Department, who agree with Marilyn Mosby that those officers that day committed grave wrongs. And chiefly was the lieutenant who had been trained from his first day at the academy that when somebody needs help, you take them to the hospital. He looked at Freddie Gray with his spine 80% severed and said no.
And then I want to ask you about the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who says that he is going to be reviewing the consent decrees to reform police departments, signaling his skepticism of efforts to curb civil rights abuses by law enforcement officers. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, look, Attorney General Sessions has really, frankly, picked a fight not just with progressives, not just with the civil rights community, but on this issue, he has picked it with police chiefs across this country who've stood up one after the other to say we need these consent decrees to rebuild the departments, to build them better, to solve crime more effectively, to actually rebuild trust. Just as, frankly, he's picked a fight with leading Republicans on the broader issue of criminal justice reform. This is a man who is, when it comes to criminal justice, a complete Neanderthal, totally stuck on stupid on the old tough on crime approaches that have failed, that have brought us mass incarceration, that have brought us, not just the most incarcerated black and brown people on the planet, but the most incarcerated white people on the planet too. Simply put, he is trying to sell something that has failed for decades. He needs to just, frankly, move on or be gone.
And then I wanted to ask you about voting rights. This is an issue very close to your heart. It's an issue you took on as the NAACP president and CEO and continued afterwards. Where Sessions is going with this and what you think needs to be done across the country, it will affect your race for governor in Maryland.
Sure. Attorney General Sessions showed his true colors on voting rights decades ago when he chose to prosecute one of Dr. King's lieutenants, drag a man, his reputation, his family through the mud over nothing, over, frankly, a political vendetta, over his resentment that the power balance was shifting because we were becoming more inclusive. Well, Attorney General Sessions doesn't just need to get used to the realities of the 21st century, he needs to get used to the reality of the U.S. Constitution. The reality is that he now is charged to enforce the Constitution, and that he will ultimately find that even in the eyes of this very conservative Supreme Court, there will be times that he will be forced to change course because even they, I don't think, will be able to ultimately tolerate the sort of frankly, constitutional approach he takes on issues of voting rights, on issues of criminal justice reform. It's sad. I mean, you look at Jeff Sessions and you wish he was capable of the evolution that you saw in Robert Byrd, or the evolution we saw in his old friend George Wallace. It's really time for Jeff Sessions not just to catch up with the 21st century, but to frankly even get caught up with the second half of the 20th century.
Which takes us to President Trump. After being extremely upset over many people pointing out that he lost the presidential election by almost 3 million votes, though he did win the Electoral College. He appointed what he calls a Commission on Election Integrity to be headed by the Kansas Attorney General Chris Kobach. And I was wondering if you can talk about the direction that will go and what Donald Trump Trump is attempting to do here and what you want to see happen around voting rights?
You know, Amy, look, I'm proud of Maryland because back in 2012, when states to the north and south of us, Virginia and Pennsylvania, were heavily invested in passing laws to suppress voting rights, we passed laws to expand voting rights. Chris Kobach was out of touch with Maryland then. He's out of touch with Maryland now, and so is Donald Trump, who's trying to, frankly, one more person who signed up to help Chris Kobach take away the voting rights of our fellow citizens, make it harder for us to vote when the very idea of our democracy is that it should be easy for all of us to vote. The reality is that we have to come together in our states now and decide that, rather than bemoaning, if you will, the transferring of powers from the federal government to the states, as happened over the last 50 years, that in this moment, when extreme right-wing conservatives control every branch of our federal government, we're just going to celebrate the power that we have in our states and move our states forward no matter what happens in Washington. On the issue of voting rights, that means we have to pass our own protections and move forward on the state. Just like on the issue of the Paris Accord, it means that if Donald Trump's going to pull out our country from the Paris Accord, then we'll sign up our states to the Paris Accord. The reality is that our states have tremendous power. It's time for us as progressives to come together, invest in moving our families, our children, our futures forward by moving our states forward, even if it's in defiance of Donald Trump and his administration.
You raised the issue of the climate accord, the Paris climate accord, that it's being said now, though President Trump hasn't finally announced it, he will in the next few days, that he'll be pulling out of the climate accord. One of the issues you took on as NAACP head was environmental justice. What does this mean to you, and what do you mean it could be left to the states? What role would you play if you became Maryland governor?
When I become governor of this state, if Donald Trump actually follows through and pulls out of the Paris Accord, we will sign up for it. The reality is that our state, if you will, is defined by the Chesapeake Bay. Our state is defined by its western mountains. Our state is committed to ensuring that our environment is preserved both for the future of our children, but for the future of the planet. And we've already seen EPA Chief Pruitt, Donald Trump's henchman for the environment, attack the Chesapeake Bay plan, first from Oklahoma, before he was even in the federal government, and now on the EPA slash funding for it about 95%. And so the simple fact is that we are all, commanded to look after the garden. We are all bound to this planet and to its future. And we must lead from where we are. And that means in our city governments, in our county governments, and in our state governments, being prepared to protect our environment, to do everything necessary, including signing on, taking the rare action of signing on to global agreements as a state. When our federal government fails to act, when it's led by people that would rather stick their head in the sand than open their eyes and admit that climate change is being caused by human behavior and we can stop it.
Former NAACP President Ben Jealous is now running for governor of Maryland. We'll be back with him in 30 seconds.